Yeah, so I was scrolling Facebook as you do, and I made a bunch of filmmaking Facebook groups, but I tend to just sort of be invisible because usually when somebody's asking for advice or ideas or something, it tends to devolve in the comment section pretty rapidly. So I stay away from that, but this one piqued my interest because it's just a general camera recommendation, which is interesting. I'm always interested to see what people have to say because I have my own opinions. But I also realized this comment section, it didn't become awful, or at least it hasn't yet. It's got quite a few comments on it, but it hasn't become awful. So I want to just go through this post because I think it's really interesting, and I just also wanted to appreciate when the internet doesn't do terrible things to people for no reason. So I'm going to bleep out or blur out names and the group that it's in because they didn't consent to this kind of video. So we'll jump into it. So I have a question about camera options recommendations. A friend and I are planning to shoot a low budget feature later this year, and it'll be a hybrid of found footage and traditional style shooting. We initially wanted to shoot with something more vintage from maybe the 2010 era, but also aren't very technically inclined enough to shoot on anything that doesn't record to SD cards. What would some camera ideas to achieve the not too vintage home movie look within maybe the $500 to $700 budget? Think Paranormal Activity or even the Creep movies. Interesting. A few interesting things here. So this is for a project, and they're going to buy a camera for a project, and traditionally, you don't want to buy a camera for a project. You're better off renting because obviously the project ends. But when you're at a no budget situation, you might as well buy the camera. I get what they're going at. They're admitting they're not technically inclined and they want to record to SD cards. I'm glad that was set up front. I have a lot of respect for that. It also makes things easier. I feel like it's a little confusing that they said vintage in the 2010s era because I feel like vintage means older, and would you call vintage 2010s clothes vintage clothes? I don't know, but I think I understand what they're going for. The vibe that they're going for is like the DSLR revolution era. Creep works, Paranormal Activity works. I would even put Tiny Furniture, Lena Dunham's project that got her girls, was shot on a Canon DSLR, so I think that, I think I understand what they're going for. So my recommendations, just knee-jerk recommendations, would be, so the first one would be a camcorder, like a Canon Handycam. Canon Vixia has been around, and there's different versions of it. It's been around forever. That's probably what I would recommend. I'd get a couple of used Canon Vixias. They're camcorders. We all know what they do. You have a flippy screen and you can press record. And that's pretty much all you got. The nicer ones can zoom in and out, but I think that's honestly for what I'm shooting. That's what I'm circling. This is just a coincidence for an end of the year project that I'm working on. Short of that, if you want to get a little bit more complicated, a DSLR, like a Canon T5i. I think we're on like the T9i era now, but any DSLR or mirrorless camera from a few years ago, especially if they only do 1080p, tend to be really cheap. In the case of Canon, I think instead of a T7i, you need the I in order to get the flip out screen, which is super useful. Again, that's what Lena Dunham shot her thesis project on. I think that works. I think either way works. I think for what they're trying to do, they'd be better served with a couple of camcorders because it's real hard to mess up camcorders. And also camcorders tend to have global shutters, which means motion. It's nice to have a global shutter when you're running, for instance. That's what I would do, especially because the SD card of it all. But let's go through what people said. So, first person wrote, "I have an Arriflex 16mm lights and sound equipment. I can make that vintage look happen. PM me." I guess they're pitching themselves as a director of photography, and they're saying, "I'll bring this camera package to set." I think this person is either ignoring what they mean by vintage, what these filmmakers mean by vintage, or misunderstanding or is trying to upsell them, because I'm looking at the camera and I'm looking at that film magazine on top and I'm getting real uncomfortable, because you got to buy the film. You got to shoot the film and shoot it good enough that you don't screw it up. Then you got to ship it somewhere and have them develop it and digitize it. That all costs a bunch of money. These people ask for SD cards. So I think the first comment is actually kind of a swing and a miss, but it's not from a mean way. They're not being mean about it. They're just, this guy seems to be boldly pitching his 16 millimeter vintage Arriflex camera, which is a very cool camera, but I don't think that's what these filmmakers are trying to do. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they do want to hire this person. I'd shoot on a present day camera in at least 4K and get the look you want in post. I've shot some of these old cameras and you're going to have way less flexibility with your footage if you shoot on one of them. That's true. Until recently, all consumer cameras shoot in 8-bit color, which means it's baked in. Whatever whatever colors the camera profile, recorded in, that's pretty much what you got. You can't really mess with it all that much in the color grade. Kind of seems like that's what they're asking for anyway. So I don't have a problem with that. The idea that you would shoot in a higher resolution like 4K, because a lot of consumer cameras right now shoot in 4K, for a $500 to $700 budget, it's going to be a Panasonic like a G7 or a G85. They don't shoot in 10-bit, so you're going to get whatever colors you get, but it is what it is. So the next comment is, a good professional colorist can achieve any look desired, shoot raw and at 10-bit or more. I'm based on the people want to shoot on SD cards, I think what this person said is basically just a foreign language, but they're not wrong. I'm a colorist, and in a lot of situations, yes, it's really nice to have really high color bit depth footage that's really flexible. That's really what you're getting when you shoot raw or when you shoot in really high bit depth. Flexibility in the ability to manipulate the colors and the lights, the exposure in post. I can make a vintagey 2010s era camera look with whatever camera I'm shooting, because I'm a colorist. For simplicity's sake and for not having to, think about it, not having to mess with it, I still would say camcorder or Canon Rebel camera over having a colorist do it, honestly. For these people, I don't think I'm of the opinion, based on the very limited information, that these filmmakers, I don't think they're interested probably in going out to a post-production house for a colorist after they've shot this. That just doesn't seem like the vibe I'm getting, but maybe I'm wrong. So what 2010 is vintage? Film. Vintage is most likely 70s grain type 35 millimeter. I think 2010 is digital. I mean, that's the most aggressive comment so far. I don't disagree with them, but I don't think the filmmakers, I think they were just saying, DSLR revolution. I would have said that. Obviously, the filmmakers said shooting on SD cards, and so I maybe they've never heard of the DSLR revolution. If you're not in it, you're not in it. So no big deal. Maybe you're looking at mini DV camera. I've shot on those. I prefer shooting on memory cards. The response from the OP. We prefer to record on SD cards for simpler transfer. Person writes back, I thought you meant SD, not recording onto an SD card, so standard definition. Yeah, okay, whatever. And then it says plug it into a Ninja or Camera Assist or something. These people, I'm not convinced the filmmakers know what an Atomos Ninja or a Blackmagic Camera Assist or whatever it's called is. That's fine. Canon T5i, yep, I agree. I'd go with the Sony EX1. The P2 cards have SD adapters. This is where the camera nerd in me would be like, I would do this. I would go with a Sony EX1, get some P2 cards, put some SD card adapters in there with SD cards. I've done this before. It's fun. It's a lot of extra steps. And this person is just going for it. If it still looks too clean, run it through a VCR transfer back to digital. I had to look up how you get a VCR a couple months ago because somebody in my life was like, can you turn tapes into a memory card for me? And I was like, once I could have. I think you have to find a VCR now, and as it turns out, the answer was Walgreens. Walgreens will digitize tapes for you. Yeah, that's I don't know. It's an interesting post. Sony EX1, P2 cards with adapters, push it through VCR, and then re-encode it back into digital format. It's a lot of steps. And it's interesting. I think I kind of want to do that myself, but I don't. Again, I'm not convinced these filmmakers are interested in doing that. The next person says, first question is what aspect ratio you want to film in. Regardless of that, I think the most important thing for filming something like Creep is just a solid zoom lens and the right sensor. In fact, I believe Creep was shot on the Panasonic DVX that recorded SD cards or something, and that would have had a CCD sensor as well as a zoom lens. I think that look, most try to emulate when shooting on something newer. You would have to stretch the image if you want a 1080p aspect ratio, but that's what you look for. Could get one of those for around 200, 300. We used to film skate videos on those. Always loved them. The OP says, that's exactly the camera I was looking for, but couldn't find one that recorded on SD. The director said himself that's what he used, but he couldn't find an SD compatible model. Okay, maybe they understand cameras more than I thought. Sony, Canon, Panasonic camcorder. Shoot on digital camera, do it in post. Resolve had a whole film look node you can use. Yeah, but they're not gonna be doing that kind of stuff. I have a few cameras I'm willing to rent. PM me. I have a few vintage digital cameras that use SD cards or versions of SD cards. That's interesting. That got a heart shape. I can appreciate that. Use a Sony Handycam. Totally agree. And then the final comment that's here, depending on what you're going for, you might want to try it in black and white. Many filmmakers have done that sort of thing to hide certain flaws. I'm really scared of black and white as for a whole movie. I should do a whole video on why, but there's a reason why, like, one movie that goes into theaters a year that usually doesn't get a wide release is in black and white. 1 or 0. There's a reason. The reason why Clerks, the reason why what else? I guess Eraserhead. Clerks and Eraserhead were shot on black and white was because it's way cheaper to develop black and white film than it is to develop color film. That's why they did that. It's real cheap, like in order of magnitude cheaper for black and white film. When I was in high school, we had a dark room. We exclusively developed black and white film because that's the chemicals our school could afford, and also the sort of the human error in black and white film doesn't ruin stuff quite as easily as color film. So, in my opinion. So, yeah, it's honestly not toxic. I would say there's a couple moments in there where I feel like maybe the comments weren't on the right page, but I think the filmmakers did a great job describing what they were looking for and admitting that they're not technical filmmakers, and that's fine. A lot of filmmakers, especially if they didn't start as videographers or photographers or something, aren't technically minded. Basically my entire film school class of 20 of us, with the exception of me and maybe like two other people, were not technical shooters at all. They would get really intimidated by camera setups, and so a lot of them defaulted to shooting on their phone. First, because it was mostly a writing program, and so there was no point in really making it look pretty, the image, I mean. But also, more complexity for the tools means more stuff possibly in the way from trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So I think very straightforward. They want to shoot on SD cards. They want an early era digital camera. I would assume they probably want a 1080p HD because why not? And $500 to $700 budget for the camera, probably for the camera and the lens. And I would say eBay, used Canon T3, probably T4. I think it's a T4. Use Canon T4i, get the flippy screen. Or if you really don't want to mess with that stuff and you want to have insanely good battery life, any of the camcorders, again, Canon Vixia has been making Canon Vixias at least 10 years. I remember using one at work in 2011, and it's 2025. So, however, it's 14 years. So, yeah, super interesting. I'd be interested to see where this goes, what the filmmakers do, how it turns out. Happy days. No complaints. I think I understand what they're going for, and I think they're being real honest, and I think they have a real understanding of what they want and the scope of what they're capable of in picking the camera. Hopefully they record sound well and or in post-production fix the sound, because, you know, sound is half the image, half the movie. Is that the phrase? Sound is half the movie. But as far as them shooting on some potato camera from the early 2010s, I'm for it. I'm very for it. Maybe they have an editor, maybe one of them knows how to edit, but yeah, you know, no wrong answers. I think there's a time and place for buying a camera. I think there's a time and place for getting a camera that is meant to be color graded, like cinema cameras or cameras that have really high color bit depth that are intended to be color graded. And if you're not comfortable with coloring, or if you don't know what that is, and you don't have the time or the resources or specifically the cash to pay a colorist to give you the look you're trying to go for, you know, baking it in, even at the highest levels, baking it in, like Deakins bakes it in. You know, he's still shooting on cameras where there's a huge amount of latitude and a huge amount of color adjustment, which he sometimes uses, but he bakes it in. Who else bakes it in? Tarantino basically only shoots on film specifically to bake in the image. Like there's a well-honed practice and a well-honed reasoning for baking in the image. We happen to have color grading now, something I'm very passionate about and I enjoy doing, but not every time, you know? And if it's a teeny tiny project where you know the look is going to be cheap digital cameras from the 2010s, is there a reason to bake in it? Is there a reason to have all the extra latitude to color grade later? Probably not. You know, if they had a $150,000 budget or a $1 million budget and they wanted a 2010s digital, I'd say then definitely go for something that shoots high bit rate or RAW and hire a colorist, because the colorist is going to make it look in the fashion of that 2010s era, but also, you know, smooth off the edges, smooth off the things that are distracting and annoying and problematic about those kind of files and those kind of colors back then, because it's not a perfect image, but you can, I'm babbling. Anyway, interesting post. Glad it didn't devolve like it usually does, and good stuff, you know. Happy days. Catch you next time.